Familial healthy aging and longevity, the role of spouses. Your grandmother lived to 98. Her sister made it to 101. Their mother? 96. You're sitting at a family reunion feeling pretty good about your genetic lottery ticket when someone mentions that your grandfather, the one who married into this dynasty of longevity, also lived to 95, and he wasn't related to any of them by blood. So here's the question that's been keeping gerontologists up at night. Did he win the genetic lottery too, or did he basically absorb his wife's family's ability to not die? And if that's actually possible, what does that mean for the rest of us? For decades, scientists studying families where people routinely live into their 90s and beyond focused almost entirely on the people born into those families. They looked at genes. They looked at shared dinner tables. They looked at whether longevity ran in bloodlines like eye color or height. But there was this weird blind spot in the research. What about the spouses, the people who married into these super-aging families from the outside? They also seemed to live longer than average people. Was that luck? Was it that healthy people marry healthy people? Or was something else going on? Something about being married to someone whose family knows how to age exceptionally well? This is the gap a team of researchers from Denmark, the US, and the Netherlands decided to fill. And what they found is honestly kind of uncomfortable if you like neat genetic explanations for why some people live longer than others. The researchers used something called a matched cohort study, which is basically the detective work of epidemiology. They identified families with exceptional longevity. We're talking people who hit the 90-plus club with surprising frequency. Then they looked at everyone those people married. The trick was finding a fair comparison. They didn't want to just compare spouses of long-lived people to random people on the street, because maybe those spouses were just naturally healthier or wealthier to begin with. So they matched each spouse who married into a longevity family with another spouse who married into a regular family, but made sure both spouses were similar in age, sex, and birth year. Think of it like this. If you wanted to know whether a special diet made people live longer, you'd need to compare someone eating the diet to someone who looks and lives exactly like them in every way except the diet. That's what this was, but for marriage. They pulled data from multiple countries and multiple decades, looking at death records and family histories going back generations. The study wasn't small either. These were thousands of people tracked over decades. They were measuring one main thing. Did people who married into longevity-enriched families actually live longer than matched controls who didn't? The answer was yes. Significantly yes. Spouses of people from these long-lived families had substantially reduced mortality compared to their matched counterparts. We're not talking about an extra 6 months. We're talking about meaningful, measurable extensions of life. Now here's where it gets interesting. The researchers then asked a question that splits into 3 possibilities. First, selection bias. Maybe the healthiest, longest-living genetic dice rollers in the general population are exactly the people marrying into these families, so of course they lived longer. Second, shared environment. Maybe living in a house with people who eat well, exercise, don't smoke, and have great stress management just rubbed off on the spouse through osmosis. Third, behavioral convergence. Maybe the spouse actually changed their behavior, adopted the habits and practices that made their partner's family special. The findings suggested something more nuanced than any single explanation. There was definitely some selection happening. People who marry into longevity families probably already tend to be healthier than random people. But that didn't explain all of it. Even when researchers adjusted for that, the spouses still had better outcomes. There was something else. The data pointed toward behavioral and environmental factors playing a real role. Spouses weren't just genetically lucky. They were actively becoming more like the families they married into, at least in terms of health outcomes. This matters for a few concrete reasons. First, if you married someone whose family lives forever, congratulations, you've statistically improved your odds. But it's not magic, and it's not just their genes doing something to yours. Second, This suggests that the way we live matters more than we sometimes assume. You can't change your parents, but you can change the people around you and the habits you adopt. If longevity runs in families partly because of shared behaviors and environments rather than purely genes, that's actually empowering. It means you're not locked into your own family's mortality patterns. Move toward healthier people. Adopt their habits. It apparently works. Third, this raises serious questions about health inequality. Longevity-enriched families often have resources, access, education, and generational knowledge about healthcare that regular families don't. If marrying into that gives you a longevity boost, what about people who can't access those networks or resources? This study doesn't exist in a vacuum. There's already substantial research showing that marriage itself is good for longevity. People with stable marriages live longer than single people. There's also research showing that social networks and community matter enormously for aging well. But this study is one of the first to really dig into whether marrying into a specific family culture of longevity creates an extra boost. It's a more granular question, and it opens the door to new research. If behavioral and environmental factors explain part of the spouse effect, which specific behaviors matter most? Is it diet, sleep, exercise, stress management, preventive healthcare? Probably all of it, but in what proportions? There are also competing theories worth considering. Some researchers argue that genetics play a much larger role in longevity than environmental factors. They might look at this study and say the effect is smaller than it appears, or that the spouses were always going to be healthy anyway. That's fair criticism. And the study itself acknowledges that it's looking at correlation, not directly proving causation. Just because spouses of long-lived people live longer doesn't prove that being around them caused the longevity. There could be unmeasured factors involved. But here's the thing. If you marry someone whose parents are routinely making it to 95, you're not just getting genes. You're getting a whole package. You're getting their doctors, their knowledge, their habits, their family dinners, their values, their stress management strategies. You're getting osmosis with longevity. And it apparently works. The single most wild takeaway from this research is that the people in your life might literally be changing how long you live, and not because of DNA. So here's what's worth thinking about. If you can gain years just by being around people who know how to age well, what does that say about the person you chose to build a life with? Turns out scientists have been busy, and they're not done yet.